Hello and welcome to the first Fistful of TOWs 3 Rule Spotlight. These are little modular videos I'm going to be putting out in conjunction with the main campaign. If you're just here to learn the system, they should be useful to you, and if you're here to keep an eye on the campaign, it should help you understand the context that these battles are being fought in. So, today we're going to start with the most basic, the turn procedure. It's fairly simple. It's an I go, you go system. So the first side, which the rulebook calls the attacker, places their reinforcements on the table, checks for artillery availability, and conducts artillery fire. Then they move, moving each of their units. There's no activation system in Fistful of TOWs. Any unit on the table can move. This movement may provoke overwatch fire from opponents. Say you're moving out of trees and into open terrain. If you're moving into very close contact with the enemy, you may have to resolve a close combat procedure. We're not going to be talking about the nitty-gritty details of resolving those procedures today. Finally, you're going to shoot. And for most of you wargame, at least modern wargame players out there, the move, interrupt, fire, shoot cycle should be fairly familiar. But we are still going to work a basic example. Oh, at the end of each turn, you reverse sides and start from the top. I go, you go. So for our example, we have this little table set up with a hill that separates the table. To the left there, we have player B, who has a couple LAV3s, LAV3s, whatever you want to call them. And player A there on the right has a couple Daimler armored cars. We are mixing eras here today. So this is our table setup, and for our very first turn, player A is going to move his armored cars up to the north for his movement phase, and then he's going to shoot. Then, next turn, player B is going to move his vehicles further back, I'm assuming they have a much longer range, and then he is going to shoot. We're ignoring a lot of the phases here for this basic example, but it is I go, you go. Move, shoot, move, shoot. Steps 2 and 3 are one turn. Step 4 and 5 are another turn. Now, let's shake it up a little bit. We have a new table set up. This time, the LAV3s there have been parked in that spot long enough that they have overwatch markers. They're dedicating their attention to watching this flank around the hill. Turn order is the same, so player A is going to start moving his armored cars, but as soon as line of sight is established, player B calls for overwatch fire. He cashes in those tokens there and conducts fires on these temporarily paused vehicles. Now, they're not fully stopped. They're allowed to complete their movement after this, but it allows interrupt, so for example, if there were cover there to the south that player A were dashing to, the overwatch fire could still happen while they were briefly exposed out of cover. But now those vehicles are out of movement, and so player A's turn, remember we interrupted the turn, we did not finish that turn, player A's turn continues, and they shoot. Then player A's turn is done. Now that fire combat is over, player B starts their turn by moving their vehicles, and then, in this case, player B cannot shoot with these specific vehicles because they already conducted overwatch fire. However, had one vehicle fired during the overwatch on player A's turn, then the other vehicle would still be available at the end of player B's turn to conduct fire combat. Alright, now this is very basic, just vehicles, but for our third and final example, we're going to add in artillery. So this time, player A has an artillery support group off table. So if you recall the turn procedure from the very beginning, artillery comes before movement or shooting. So player A is going to be clever here, and the first thing they do during their artillery phase is they place a barrage on the enemy labs. The goal here is to use this barrage to damage and suppress, you see those suppression markers I added, the enemy. Remember, the labs have a longer range, so they're going to get overwatch fire on the way in. But now that they're suppressed, that fire is going to be less effective as the armored cars move in. So that's the artillery phase resolved. Now the movement phase for player A begins. They move, and as soon as they enter the range of the labs, player B cashes in those markers, calls for overwatch fire, resolves that overwatch fire. Then player A finishes their movement phase. Now it's player A's shoot phase, as shown there. Bang, bang. This wraps up player A's turn. And if you remember, for player B's turn, they're going to get to move. In this case, it's a squiggly line to denote that being suppressed slows down your movement, which is another benefit of using artillery in this way. But remember, both of those labs fired during player A's movement phase as part of their overwatch fire, which means neither of them get to shoot at the end here. So that's the turn procedure, a nice, quick, simple presentation of it. There's more detail in the book that I did not discuss, including hold fire markers and close combat. I did not have an example of either of those. But hopefully you can understand how that basic tempo of artillery, movement, shooting, combined with overwatch fire, provides for simple and realistic resolution of modern military battles. Everything you saw here in the video is roughly one-to-one extensible to infantry combat in Fistful of TOWs. The only thing being slight differences regarding whether or not you can take Overwatch with missiles and other things. Oh, and just for the history people, this is the cover image of the rules I have on the screen here. I believe that's an M1 Abrams here in the front. The Striker MGS off to the side there, or it's the Japanese, it's like the Type 19 maneuver combat vehicle. And then in the back there, I believe that is a British Mark IV tank from World War I. And back left is the U.S. Armor Division patch. The three colors represent artillery, infantry, and armor, the three arms of ground combat. And I'm not going to point at the colors because I don't know off the top of my head which is which. And I believe this is the cavalry insignia, but I would have to look that up to confirm. It's kind of funny when you think about it that we have the very famous tank that started armored warfare in the trenches of World War I, the dominant modern combat tank, kind of the definition of main battle tank here in the front, at least from an American perspective. I know you Leopard and what's the French one? Leclerc fans are out there. I find it funny that the Striker MGS made its way onto the cover because, as far as I understand, it's a system that was built in limited capacity and quickly phased out. Going to be a strange little quirk of history to any historians looking at this rule book 100 years from now, trying to figure out if this thing was so dang important, why isn't it showing up in any other histories? All right, that's about it for today. Hope you enjoyed the video and have a good one.